Like a snake eating its own tail, it seems like the biggest threat to the AI startup bubble is other AI startups itself. As models continue to get better with Gemini 3 Pro and Claude Opus 4.5 dropping, it seems like vibe coders are doing more than just launching their own AI startups, they're also replacing the ones that they depend on. Vibe coding is eating SaaS. This is probably happening more than we think. Customer canceled after 18 months. Reason, we built it ourselves. They were paying $300 a month. One of my best customers last week. Thanks for everything, we're moving to an internal solution. They hired a developer, spent 3 months building a worse version of my product, and are now maintaining it themselves. Their developer probably costed $8K a month, my tool was $300 a month. But sure, makes total financial sense. I think it's a control thing. Some companies would rather own a crappy internal tool than rely on external software. Can't compete with that, just have to accept it and move on. Teams were always capable of building a lot of the software that they've depended on. It just so happens that AI lowers the bar to do that because now everyone is a senior engineer. But the question comes down to, what is it worth taking the time to do? You could go as far as code your own cursor or your own browser. Now that AI is advanced enough, you could probably get some of those things done within a couple of days and have it sort of match the quality of what you have going on. Something I learned pretty early was that every time you launch a product and you have users, including yourselves, you now have to own the maintenance of that product. So it becomes really annoying when you created this small thing for internal use and somebody's actually using it quite a bit. Every single time they have a problem, you are being taken away from your job to try and maintain or update that tool, even if AI is doing all the updating itself. I think Theo has a particularly interesting take on this. If an engineer tells you that they can replace a service you're paying for and the service costs less than you're paying them, tell them to get back to fucking work. Engineers are so bad evaluating their time properly, they can't be trusted to make good economic decisions. And I think there's a line to draw here. It's obviously on a case-by-case basis of what makes more sense to build in-house versus use an external service for, and it's always been like that. But I do particularly agree with the idea that engineers are terrible at valuing their time. I think a lot of the times what the startup or the business actually needs and what the engineer wants to do are very far away, which is also why you see a lot of friction between things like engineers and product managers. As an engineer, it's extremely easy for us to just want things to be really well done, to see the beauty in our code and make sure that everything looks perfect. And if we can build something ourselves, we want to do that. But at the same time, it might come at the cost of not prioritizing what you should be working on and the company just going under and not having a job in a month. Gemini 3 is basically AGI at this point. Lawyers love using Harvey and Lagora's tabular review features, but not everyone can afford the $500 a month. I asked Gemini to build it itself. It supports batch, blah, blah, blah. I have open sourced the code, so now you can try it with your own API key. My workflow was simple. Feed Harvey and Lagora's public product pages and demos into Gemini, ask Gemini to draft a detailed product specification, give those specs to Gemini in Google's AI Studio, test and iterate until the prototype reaches feature parity, and deploy locally. And Soren commented saying, when lawyers with no technical training ask Gemini 3 to replicate expensive SaaS so they can stop paying for marked up intelligence, this is the squeeze microeconomics predict. Now, first of all, I don't think Gemini being able to replicate someone's landing page is AGI by any means. And I do think it's a very non-technical person type of thing to say. So much so that the dude put AI builder in his LinkedIn profile. But I think it also misses the nuance that so much goes into making good software that just having the technical features by itself is not the entire picture. So many great products that we use on a daily basis are remade multiple times by different companies and different developers across the entire world, but there's a reason that most software follows the power law distribution. 99% of people use the top product and the rest of the products get less than 5% of the actual usage. I mean, sure, you could probably code your own Google at this point with help of AI, and it wouldn't be great because a lot of coding Google just comes down to indexing, but is it really worth the time? Paul Buchheit also had an interesting take. If you don't know, he's pretty much the guy that invented Gmail and also created the original prototype of Google AdSense. And I respect him a lot, so I really wanted to pronounce his name right. And for some reason, when I Googled how to pronounce his name, random YouTube channel has a video on exactly how to pronounce his name with 3.5K views.
Paul Buchheit.
Bouquet. Although when I actually Google it, it says it's pronounced Paul Buchheit. I'm just gonna say Buchheit. I worry that nearly all startups and software design companies will get wiped out by AI that can simply clone their product. It's difficult to maintain high margins or ACV when faced with infinite competition. How will your startup survive? Is it even possible? And he notes that, to be clear, the threat here is not from some janky clone produced by Gemini 3 and deployed locally, like we see in our lawyer's example. It is from a high quality clone produced by Gemini 4 or 5 and hosted / supported by a dedicated entity, perhaps another startup using AI to clone all products. Something funny is there are a lot of companies that handle a wide array of business use cases, like for example, Zoho, which does a whole suite of things. It's sort of like the Microsoft Office, but like for software companies. And the CEO of Zoho actually took shots at the vibe coding community right after Google CEO talked about how good AI assisted coding is. And Gary Tan chimed in saying Zoho's business would be the first to be competed away by people building their own custom software built by people using Replit, Emergent Labs, and Taskade. Why pay $30 per seat per month for overbundled SaaS when soon even non-tech ops people can vibe code a custom solution in a weekend? Prime responded saying, why use Replit when I could Cursor vibe code that? Oh, why use Cursor when I can use Cursor to vibe code that? And I guess the obvious implication, if you took that train of logic all the way through, is that if no company uses any other company because they code everything in-house, well, that company in itself would get replaced by other companies coding their solution in-house, which means no companies would be left with any users, which means we would have no companies in the first place because no one's making any money. And since that only really applies to the software industry, that means every industry that doesn't provide software, things like physical goods or actual services that rely on software, will now just build the software themselves. And it sort of feels like everyone in this argument is kind of shooting themselves in the foot, because if that was really the case, what we would end up with is a bunch of service-based businesses like plumbing agencies, and for all their software needs, they would just have a vibe code specialist or an engineer in-house that would just create literally every single part of their software stack. And in this argument, on one corner, you sort of have the legacy businesses like Zoho that are like, no one could ever replace us, software's way too complicated. And then you have people in the vibe coding corner that's like, your business is not going to exist because our vibe coded solutions are going to take it. But again, the obvious implication is that if you have a software company who's vibe coding their entire software stack, you inherently create software that will serve in someone else's software stack that can also just be replaced as well. So in the end, I guess it's the plumbers that win. My personal opinion is, I think like most things, the answer is somewhere in the middle. Obviously, things like hard tech and proprietary softwares, things that could be patented or knowledge is just not available to general AI because it's so nuanced and specific. Things like sending rockets into space, for example, are probably here to stay. And while I do think a lot of things will start to be built in-house, I think like Theo said, if your company's priority is to replace every other company's priority to save a couple $100s a month on the softwares you're paying for, it's probably not the best use of your engineers' time. And I've talked to a lot of product-facing people that aren't technical that end up building things in-house instead of using third-party tools. And I'm not even joking, a lot of it comes down to the fact that they have never been able to build their vision out before. And now that they have the tools to do it, they're like so crazy over it, even if it's not the best business decision to make. Like this one dude I know is CEO of a company, and he's always had these grand visions and ideas, but the engineers on his team have never really had the time to act on it. So he spends like hours a day using either Bolt, Lovable, or Google AI Studio to build out all the crazy things he's always wanted. And then he hands like the vibe coded solution off to engineers who still have to take the time to fix it up and actually deploy it. So when you compare something like that to just using a tried and true service that is constantly being maintained by the team doing it, constantly being updated to reflect like the latest changes in models or the latest changes in the actual market itself, and have an entire group of people dedicated to solving that one problem, it sort of still feels like a bad decision unless it's something that's so not mission critical and is not going to change or require maintenance that you can sort of build it and forget it. Definitely think the way people build software is never going back to the old way. I think that's just a fact. Like whether you like vibe coding or not, we are not moving back to a society where engineers do not use AI assisted coding in some way. It is just too powerful in the business use case. I think there are like artisan coders that love the act and art of coding, and I'm personally one of them. I love doing things by hand, but also as a second-time startup founder, I recognize that if I want to compete in today's market, I can't just take 8 times the amount of time to code something. And AI is getting to the point where it is good enough if you are like a senior engineer and you know how to guide it, like you're not putting out AI slop. You're putting out like 90% of the same quality of the code that you would put out yourself because you know how to guide the AI. When I ask Cursor to generate something, I sit there and I watch the lines of code that it produces. I take like 5 minutes to go over it. I will usually ask it to refactor refactor things or clean things up to make things more maintainable for itself later on. And if there are any edge cases that it forgot or security things, I will usually be able to catch it. And then I will move on. And it's still like 5 times faster than if I coded things myself. I think these are the type of use cases and these are the type of people that win. And as AI gets better, you're going to need less and less coding expertise to put out software that is no longer considered AI slop. The way I think this affects the market is that B2C is probably going to dwindle in size or be less useful as more people can code their own solutions. A lot of the time with B2C products, you sort of pay like $5, $10 a month for something that you don't really need, but it just gives you a slight boost. And I'm not talking about Netflix or Spotify or like an Instagram premium membership. I'm talking about those tools that you might use to keep your day organized or to update your calendar or to have bookings on your calendar, manage your day-to-day. I think those things for most people are so nuanced to what they want, also easily replaceable by AI, that the B2C market for them is probably going to squeeze a bit. But I think for enterprise, a lot of the times, companies always had the resources to make their own solutions in-house. But depending on the problem that is being solved, there is a lot of merit of just trusting a team that has been doing this and is dedicated to that one problem, take care of it for you. So you don't have to spend resources maintaining it, and you can trust that there's a whole team thinking about that problem and solving it in a way that makes sense, as opposed to the one engineer on your team that chose to vibe code it for a weekend. Let me know what your thoughts are. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. And if you want to have these types of philosophical AI discussions, our Discord is the place to be. Link is in the description below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video.